सारे आले बिखरी हुई उम्मत एक जिस्म के आज़ा की तरह है। मुसलमान अगर किसी मुल्क में नमाज छोड़ने वाले की नमाज के छोड़ने से मुतासिर नहीं हो रहा है तो समझ लो कि उम्मत की इज्तिमाइयत टूट चुकी है।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. This is your host Abul Kalam of L2N podcast. We have a new segment about the lives of the companions of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hayat Sahaba, by Sheikh Yusuf Kandahli rahimahullah ta'ala. Today's episode is about the advice of Abu Darda radhiyallahu anhu. Before we start the chapter, Sheikh Saad hafidhahullah details about the importance of ilm and how ilm, knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ilm cannot be connected with the dunya.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. مواعظ أبي الدرداء رضي الله تعالى عنه. وأخرج أبو نعيم في الحلية عن حسان بن عطية أن أبا الدرداء رضي الله عنه كان يقول: لا تزالون بخير ما أحببتم خياركم، وما قيل فيكم بالحق فعرفتموه، فإن عارف الحق كعامله. وأخرجه البيهقي في شعب الإيمان، وابن عساكر عن أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه مثله كما في الكنز. وأخرج أبو نعيم في الحلية عن أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه قال: لا تكلف الناس ما لم يتكلفوا، ولا تحاسب الناس دون ربهم. ابن آدم عليك نفسك، فإنه من تتبع ما يرى في الناس يطل حزنه ولا يشفي غيظه. وأخرج أبو نعيم في الحلية عن أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه قال: اعبدوا الله كأنكم ترونه، وعدوا أنفسكم من الموتى، واعلموا أن قليلا يغنيكم خير من كثير يلهيكم، واعلموا أن البر لا يبلى، وأن الإثم لا ينسى. وقد أبو نعيم في الحلية بالدرداء رضي الله عنه قال: ليس الخير أن يكثر مالك وولدك، ولكن الخير أن يعظم حلمك ويكثر علمك، وأن تباري الناس في عبادة الله عز وجل. فإن أحسنت حمدت الله تعالى، وإن أسأت استغفر الله عز وجل. وأخرج أبو نعيم في الحلية عن سالم بن أبي الجعد عن أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه قال: حذر امرؤ أن تبغضه قلوب المؤمنين من حيث لا يشعر. ثم قال: أتدري ما هذا؟ قلت: لا. قال: العبد يخلو بمعاصي الله فيلقي الله بغضه في قلوب المؤمنين من حيث لا يشعر.
And then he mentions the dua of Sayyidatina Aisha radhiyallahu anha, and she says, "Oh Allah, give the people bearers knowledge limited rizq. Do not give them too much rizq, because too much provisions will lead them to be more busier in this world." And this is exemplified in the life of Abu Darda radhiyallahu anhu. If you look at the companions, the fuqara, meaning the people who lived in poverty in the Sahabas, were the fuqaha, meaning they were the most knowledgeable people. The faqih of the Sahabas lived a life of poverty. So much so, subhanallah, that they used to go out because of hunger, just to have a meal, or just even to have a date, just to find a date. They used to go to the Sahabas, Ansari Sahabas, and used to ask them questions about certain ayats of the Quran, even though they knew it. But they used to ask them that, do you know this ayat of the Quran? And so much so they would walk with them until going to the houses, and they would hope that then they would give them at least a date or a meal. This was the life of poverty they used to live in. And the prime example is Abu Hurairah anhu, who is the Imam of the Muhaddisin. Even though he lived a life in poverty, even he used to say to the other Sahabas that you were busy in the marketplaces, and we were busy being in the company of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is why Allah Ta'ala gave him so much ilm and so much ilm and knowledge of hadith. Another example is the leader of all the ulamas, Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu. He lived a life in such poverty that the Prophet ﷺ had to give him wealth, so much wealth, he had to give some wealth to him and say to him that go and do business. This is how much he lived in a life of poverty. In the same way, we see the life of Abu Darda, that he used to say to his friends that I don't even like I don't even prefer that my house be near the masjid, and so much so that I can pray 5 times salah, and I do my business without any cheating, without any lies, without any interest, nothing, no haram, all halal wealth, and I gain that money through my business, and then I spend all of the money in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I do not even like this. So his friends asked him that, "Oh Abu Darda, you are spending in the path of Allah, you're spending your wealth that you gain from your business in the path of Allah. Why don't you want this?" So Abu Darda used to say, "Because of the reckoning. I fear the reckoning. I fear Allah, I will have to give hisab, an account to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why I don't want this." This is Abu Darda anhu. He is fearing the reckoning of his halal wealth. What about us, me and you, who spend it, and he spent in the path of Allah? What about me and you? We don't. Some of us don't spend in the path of Allah. We don't even fear the reckoning. And unfortunately today, we see all around the world, the big masajids, the madrasas are surrounded by business. Wherever you go, you will see business and trading taking place. And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not take reckoning or account from people of how much wealth they spent, but Allah ta'ala will take account of how much time you spent in gaining that income and spending that income as well. min umrihi fima afna. So that is why ilm will be, Allah ta'ala will give them ilm and knowledge for those people who want akhirat, for those people who want the hereafter and not wanting the dunya. Allah ta'ala will give them the true ilm. And in this way, Abu Darda anhu says in the hadith, in one of his advices, Hassan ibn Atiyah reports that Abu Darda used to say, "Oh people, you will always remain in good and in khair as long as you love the righteous amongst you," meaning the ulama. You stay with them and you love them as well. And you will always recognize the truth when it is spoken amongst you, because the one who recognizes the truth is like the one who practices it. The same thing, amilihi. It's the same thing. The one who says the truth and recognizes it is the same to the one who practices it. And then he says, Abu Darda says, never compel people to do what they have not been compelled to do by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And never take them to task for never take them to task. Don't do muhasabah. Don't do hisab of people because that is the job of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. O son of Adam, then he says, worry about yourselves. Alayka nafsak. Worry about yourselves, meaning be preoccupied about your own faults, because the person who constantly pursues and follows the wrongs of others, and he always continues to see the wrongs of others, what will happen? Yatil, he will always be plagued and prolonged with grief. Yatil huznuhu, his grief will always be in sorrow, always be in depression, and his frustration and anger will never be decreased. He will always be angry. Why? Because he's always in this. It's like a disease for them. And then he says, "U'budullah ka'annaka tarawnahu." Worship Allah as if you can see Him, and count yourselves amongst the dead people. Remember that a little is sufficient. A little is sufficient for you is better than plenty that makes you negligent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that rizq that it's like suffices you so much is much better than that rizq that makes you forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, "Wa'alamu," know that anna al-birra la yubla, that the neki and the good deed will never be forgotten, and the good deed will always remain there. Wa anna al-ithma la yunsa, and know that ism and guna will never be forgotten. And then he says, "Laysa al-khair an yukthara malik wa waladuk." Khair, goodness, is not that thing that increases your wealth or your progeny, but walakin al-birra an yu'adhim hilmuk. Bir, goodness, is that thing that when your hilm increases, meaning your tolerance, your forbearance increases, and your knowledge of Islam increases as well. And then he says, فَإِنْ أَحْسَنْتَ حَمِدْتَ اللَّهِ. If you do good, you praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنْ أَسَأْتَ أَسْتَغْفَرْتَ اللَّهِ. And if you do bad, then you do istighfar, you seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Salim bin Abu Ja'ad narrates, Abu Darda anhu said once that one should beware, be afraid, and be careful that he is not hated in the hearts of the believers without him even knowing it. So he asked, do you know why this happens? Salim replied that, please tell us. He said, when a person secretly disobeys Allah Ta'ala, when a person secretly does ma'asi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala casts resentment and dislikeness and hatred for him in the hearts of the believers, and he is not even aware of these things. And another narration is that when a person does good deed, Allah subhanahu secretly, and he does ibadat, Allah Ta'ala transfers the muhabbat and the love of him to the hearts of the believers. So even though the people don't know that he done a good deed, but because he done it secretly, the deed he done it indoors, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala transfer the love of the believers in him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us those people who love for others, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Please like and subscribe and share with others. Until the next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.